Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 473. My name is Minter Dial, and I'm your host for this podcast, a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows on this network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com. And now I'd like to give a big thank you to the folks at Pega for sponsoring my podcast. Pega is a low-code platform for AI-powered decisioning and workflow automation. Its scalable architecture helps the world's leading organizations work smarter, unify experiences, and adapt instantly, so they're always ready for what's next. This week's interview is with Pega's Don Schuerman. Don is CTO and Vice President of Product Strategy and Marketing at Pega, responsible for Pega's industry-leading platform and CRM applications. He's a musician, improv comedian, and a master of events on and offline. In this conversation with Don, we discuss his work at Pega, his experience and lessons learned of moving the annual flagship conference from offline to online, how purpose comes alive as part of Pega's modus operandi, the challenges with hybrid work, how Pega brings simplicity to an ever-complexifying business world. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com, and please consider to drop in your rating and review. And don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show.
Don Schuerman, I am delighted to have you on. Aside from being the CTO at Pegasystems, you are a man of conviction, of energy, and I'm delighted to be able to chat with you. In your own words, Don, how would you like to describe yourself?
I think first and foremost, I describe myself as a husband and father, since that's where, I think I get most of my joy in my life. I've been really lucky in a career to find myself at a position where I get to kind of operate at the intersection of technology and business. I get to bring a background as a technologist, as someone who's done software implementation and, God forbid, even a little bit of coding, but also as someone who likes being on the strategy side of the conversation, and really likes the sort of tackling the challenge of communicating the value of technology, but also the things that organizations need to do in order to achieve that value, right? Because it's not just about getting the tech in place. It's about actually putting the right mindset and the right people and the right skills in place to make it useful.
It's often the case that one might put the cart ahead of the horses when it comes to technology, because the reality is communication is deeply human.
Yes, very much so. And I think, even over the last 2 years, I think we've learned just how important that deeply human connection is. And what you have to do when it doesn't happen by default, when you actually have to go out of your way to create it, because I do think it's essential to how we work. I think it's essential to how we find sort of fulfillment as human beings.
Well, I'd love to get into that in a bit. In your profile, Don, LinkedIn, Twitter, you write you are a guy who tries to live a yes and life.
Yes.
What does that look like? How do you make that come around in your day to day?
So yes and is a sort of tenet or philosophy that comes from improv comedy, and I've been able to kind of parallel to my career do a decent amount of improv, and the idea with yes and is that you're always building on what other people have brought forward. That as an improviser, one of the worst things that you can do is negate what somebody else has brought to the table or brought to the scene. So the idea is you say yes, you accept and embrace what they're bringing forward, and then you add your own, you build on it. And I think a lot of life can be improved by taking that yes and approach, by saying yes to things, even to things sometimes that may feel outside your comfort zone or may feel new, but also having the confidence to bring the and, to bring the perspective or the insight or the experience that is uniquely you to the conversation. And I think the combination of those two things, being open and welcoming of new ideas, but always trying to bring and add something, that's what leads to great collaboration. And I think what it leads to great friendships and great relationships.
And there's a point when we must cut down to a decision.
Yes.
So it becomes and now we will choose the idea.
And the thing that I always find, I've taught a number of improv workshops in business, and I think the idea of yes and is not to supplant the fact that sometimes, especially in business, we need to say no. We need to evaluate the decisions on the table, and then we need to pick one and move forward, right? But one of the other things that I think we often talk a lot about with my teams is, the idea of disagree and commit, right? That sometimes we find ourselves making decisions in business that not everybody, that wasn't everybody's idea. We have picked one, or we've picked a path forward. But at that point, I think that's where yes and becomes really important again, because we now need to all shift our mindset from debate to commitment, right? To yes, that is what we are going to do. And now, how can I help make and bring that thing forward? So absolutely, we need to be able to have focus. We need to be able to say no, and we need to be able to make decisions. But I also think the commitment that comes with yes and is hugely important.
It brings up for me this idea of debate. And in a boardroom, there's going to be the highest paid person, or maybe the CEO, and therefore an attributed power that lies within, and a yes sirring, or whatever that goes with that. But the place so you have brainstorming, and then there's place for challenge. So you can place it under a yes and, yet that might be sugarcoating the fact that I'm saying no to that idea.
Or that I'm disagreeing. And one of the things that I've worked at Pega for 25 years, and one of the things that I love about the culture is there is that element of challenge to it. There is that element of don't take everything as a decision made, no matter who in the organization it comes from.
Even if it comes from Alan.
Even if it comes from Alan, right? And I think that having that debate, and having, we talk a lot in the industry about thought leadership, right? And thought leadership comes down to, one, having a thought, right? So actually being able to, bring forward your experience and consideration, and having knowledge of whatever domain it is that you're talking about, that you can actually have a thought, right? And then having the conviction to lead with it, having the conviction to defend it and debate it and take it forward. And I think that's a culture that I find energizing to be a part of.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, when we're just yesing all the time, that's probably a recipe for failure, because
Exactly.
like you say, in strategy, it's all about choice and making that choice. So Don, what I've observed, for having been on the Pega journey for a few years now, you moved the Pega world online, and you, being a comedian, are perhaps so perfectly suited to be some entertaining aspect. Of course, you're bringing content as well. But I was wondering what you have learned from having moved Pega world from an offline, in-person, to an online. What has been the biggest challenges or the biggest learnings for you as an organization?
Well, I think one of the biggest learnings was just how distinct and different an online event is from an in-person event. You can't do a 2-3 day online event.
No way.
You can't. Nobody wants to sit through 2 or 3 days of online Zoom conferences.
I don't have a sound effect for yawn.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to be so intensely respectful of the people's time. And so you have to be dense, in the sense that you're using that time well. And then the other thing that you have to do is you have to figure out moments of surprise, right? Moments of awakening people, right? Because I think we spend a lot of time on Zoom meetings, and I don't know about you, but you can kind of get into a haze, right? And it's
No kidding.
when that computer's up on your screen, there's lots of other stuff that will detract us from actually being fully engaged. So moments of surprise kind of help with that. I think, somewhere along the line, somebody made a comment about the fact that as we move to online, we need to think less about being theatrical, which is what we did sort of in big conferences, and more about being cinematic. And how do you use the language of the video format itself to tell the story? So we've been playing with, and I'm actually heading out to a studio tonight to do some dress rehearsals for Pega World, which is coming up next week, or the coming weeks, and it really exploring how you use the video itself to make the experience compelling and memorable and keep people engaged. Because it's not, when you get somebody into a conference room and you shut the doors and you throw a bunch of bright lights and loud music, you get their attention. When you're one of many videos competing on their screens, you have to be that much more compelling in order to keep it.
I love that, and that move from theatrics to cinematics. That's really a good insight. And then on the other side, as you now think about going back to real world, or at least offline, maybe next year, is there things from the online experience that we can bring into it? Or and obviously there's maybe the hybrid version where we're going to have to do on and off to keep that thread probably going on. But is there anything that we can now bring from your digital experience of doing what you're doing with the time constraint, the notion of value, and making sure that they're having their attention into the offline?
I think so. I think continue to reflect that notion of the time and the value, right? And that when you're asking someone, and it feels now more than ever, right? Time and our focus is a commodity that there is not enough of. So when you ask for it, you have to make sure that you really use it. I think the other thing that comes out of some of the virtual stuff is we've had to think about, how do you do interactivity at a mass scale, right? And there's natural interactivity that happens in an in-person event. You walk around, you talk to people, you go into a demo booth, and everybody can ask their questions, etc. But one of the things we've started playing with it, in these virtual events, is interactivity on a massive scale. How do I do polling? How do I keep questions flowing? How do I have a sort of live stream conversation that's almost happening simultaneously with some of the content? And I think some of that can be really compelling and brought forward into some of these more larger scale live events, so that we're not just going back to 10,000 people sitting in an arena listening to a speaker speak for 2 hours, but we retain some of that mass scale interactivity even in these larger events.
When we have a large event, 3 days, everyone's accumulated, there's obviously an expectation for content, and as an organization, you need to deliver content, what they're looking for. And yet I've always felt, and I ran a fairly large company myself, you tend to forget that actually helping to network and do what we do in person takes time, and you need airtime and space and allow for coincidence and serendipity to happen, and not feel like I'm also missing out on content, because that's also a little bit of the FOMO story. When you're at a big conference, oh my God, I got to go back in. I don't have time to hang out, network, ask questions, and converse with other attendees.
And a lot of times, I think that's the thing that I think it's so much harder to get in a virtual event, and that I'm looking forward to getting back to an in-person, is that when you put a lot of people in one space, you get, as you say, the unintended coincidences, the side conversations, the networking opportunities, and as a company, we believe that the people who probably have the most to say about what we do isn't us, it's our clients. And so the best thing that we can do is create a forum where our clients can talk to other clients, right? And share what they've learned, share things that work, share things that haven't, right? And that creating the space for that kind of discussion to happen has always been, a huge part of what we wanted to do in an in-person event. And what I've been really excited about is, as things are opening back up, getting back into in-person client meetings, even in some cases, bringing up one or two clients together for a meeting or for a conversation. You're starting to see some of that serendipity pop back in again. And I think people find that, once we get past the initial kind of haze of it's just so exciting to see real people in person again, right? Well, once you get past that, you then start seeing this deeper opportunity for how we engage.
In a conference I'm speaking at, they were actually talking about the fear of coming back at some level. And do I know how to network again? What are we allowed to do? How do you hug, shake hand, and all the other awkwardnesses that we've been going through? So we will be seeing about that. So for people who are listening on my show, I've had several guests on the show. And one of the things I'm reflecting on is I feel like there's, obviously you have you are fast growing, you've got a lot of customers. I'm wondering what the discussion around community is at Pega. To what extent that is a concept you look at, you nurture. Tell me where you are in that.
I think community and the idea of ecosystem is a topic I probably engage with pretty much once a day at least, right? And I think the other thing that I would probably say is we're also increasingly realizing that it's communities, right? Because in our client base, it's not one size fits all. There are IT leaders who have very specific sets of things that they want to talk about as they are managing their own migrations to cloud technologies, et cetera. You've got leaders in data science who are thinking about things like bias in the data and how do they actually build some of the skills to effectively use AI technologies to drive value. So a lot of what we think about is how both virtually and physically do you provide space for these communities to develop, and making decisions about where it makes sense for us to really drive and nurture, and in some cases structure some of the communities, and where are the places where we just kind of want to drop a seed and then stand back and let the community run and form on its own, and operate somewhat independently of us.
It's very tempting to want to control it and put your stamp on it. And
right. Well, and look, I think there's certain places where we want to be feeding information, for example, into our developer community about best practices and new releases of the software and how the things that we believe our developers need to really understand to be effective. But also at the same time, we have a lot of client communities where we don't actually come to every meeting. We don't actually come to every conversation. They want to be able to have that conversation as a group, and they might invite people from Pega in if there's certain topics that group is interested, but it needs to be self-organizing. And the value of it is that it is a little bit of self-organizing, and there is a peer-to-peer connection sort of without us coming in necessarily. And I think getting that right mix, right? I think there's a place for both. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, especially in an ecosystem as large as ours, there are different interest groups and different audiences that need to have their own sort of small sets of connections that they can build.
So, yeah, I know you guys have just done some research
Yes.
around complexity, which is basically in every tagline you have where you guys crush business complexity. And I feel like that's clearly a big theme from my interactions with my customers. And I am now a consultant, although speaker first, hopefully. And at many consultancies, you're going to hear them, oh, we're going to make it simple. Consultancies like to think that they make things simple. I mean, that's what they talk about. What does Pega do differently to make things simple and crush complexity?
Well, so I think one of the things that we have to do a little bit is accept the fact that complexity isn't going to go away. And, potentially, I think of this as a little bit of like, we're moving towards a state of entropy, right? It's going to get more so, right? Like, and that's, I feel that is true in everything. I feel that is true in the way that we work, right? And we're now shifting to a distributed nature, right, of working. And I think where we end up is probably actually going to be more sophisticated and more complicated than it was where we were before, where we're going to have this mix of some people at home, some people remote, groups sometimes coming into the office, but not everybody will be in the office. So I still need to maintain a collaborative space for the people who aren't physically there, right? Like that is going to be complex, and it's going to require us to think through it. I think the world that we live in, with pandemics and what's going on now in the Ukraine and some of the economic concerns, like we're going to have to continue to confront that. And then also, I'm a technologist, and you go look at, things like the MarTech landscape that comes out every year, or the Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape of technology. Those things aren't getting simpler.
They're multiplying like spores.
They're multiplying like spores. And so I think the thing that you need, and what we want to try to provide to our clients, is a way to guide through and cut through and manage the complexity to get to the things that are actually really important. How does that technology deliver value to the business? How do I get the most economies of scale out of how I use and run that technology? How do I simplify an experience for a customer, for an employee, so they can actually get to what they want to do? And the metaphor that I often kind of think about is like, if you think about something like the iPhone is a far more complicated piece of engineering than my Commodore 64 was.
Sure.
Right? It's far more complicated. The insides of it, and the engineer who built the Commodore 64 would try to open up the iPhone and they would be completely lost. But the iPhone is easier to use than my Commodore 64 was. Mm-hmm. Right? It's actually an easier experience. It's more directly consumable by a user. So I think what we need to be thinking about is the complexity is not going to go away, but how do we actually use that to drive simpler experiences, more accessible experiences for especially customers and employees?
You've got questions, we've got answers. Business leadership, ownership, and sales can be challenging. Tune into the Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast to learn from the world's experts. Join me, your host, Diane Helbig, as I chat with people who have expertise in various areas of business. You'll enjoy the lively conversations that are focused on providing you with the ideas, tips, and suggestions you need to realize greater success. Get what you need for your business when you need it from the people who have the answers. Accelerate Your Business Growth is part of the Evergreen Podcast Network and is available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Well, that would suit very well I don't know if it's your tagline exactly, but you call it for Pega, you talk about build for change. Would you characterize that as your purpose of the company, or is that just a tagline?
I think it is very much core to the purpose, because I think we believe fundamentally, and this is a bit of a cliche, but change is the constant, and I think that change is accelerating. I think that we are moving to a world that will be more change, right? I mean, just look at how much change we've gone through in the past couple of years, right? And so the best thing that we can help our client organizations do is not necessarily try to anticipate what they're going to need in 1 to 2 to 3 years, because I don't know if anybody can predict it. But instead, how do you design an architecture in your technology, in your organization, in the skills of your people that is actually built to change, that is built for the acceptance of the fact that you need to be able to change. And that's, I feel like one of the maybe places where we lost the thread a little bit on the idea of digital transformation was we thought of it as sort of like an end state, a goalpost, a finish line to run across and like, woo, we're digitally transformed. Where I think digital transformation is more about just accepting the fact that you are going to be constantly changing and constantly transforming. And how do you build a business and a technology that's designed to do that?
I love that. I mean, ultimately, as you said at the beginning, it's really a lot about mindset. And so much of these mindsets require flexing and practice. And you let it go, think like I got there, then you'll be blindsided very quickly by the next tsunami coming along. We're just talking about purpose for a second. When you look at rendering complexity more simple, finding ways to be strategic about your resources because time, money is limited, and that's what strategy is all about. One of the ways I like to go about things, and I'm wondering what to extend it's within your discourse, purpose is also a way of rendering simple the decisioning. That's to say, if you're aware deeply of your purpose, then you know that this is not part of it, or maybe pragmatically you have to do things, but on balance as a way to filter and decide yes or no. Purpose can be a great guiding tool. To what extent is that brought in? Can that be part of the Pega system when you input and you're working with a client and listen, hey, Don, I really want my purpose to dominate in my decision making?
Yes. And, this may start getting a little bit deep into the tech, but there are a couple of places where we really try to drive that, right? So I think AI, as an example, right, is sometimes, not always, but sometimes a solution in search of a problem, right? We've got lots of, we're going to do some AI stuff. What are we going to do?
It's going to sound cool.
Yeah. Right. We're going to do some AI, right? Where the way we try to get our clients to think about AI is start with the business outcome that you want to drive. Start with where you're trying to get, right? And for a lot of our clients, that might be, I want to retain more customers by having better conversations with them. Or I want to reduce the burden on my customers in terms of getting service by being more proactive in how I engage with them, right? That's the outcome. That's actually what I'm trying to drive. And then the way I implement decision technology and AI technology is all about getting back to that, getting to that outcome. We do the same thing when we think about workflow. We tend to apply this concept of case management to workflow. And the powerful thing about case management is I think when it's done right, you start with the end state. You start with every time I run a process, every time I run a workflow, it's because I'm trying to get to something. I'm trying to actually solve something for my customer. I'm trying to resolve a service issue or fix an exception that caused a problem or deploy a new product or onboard a new customer so that their account is active. Like there is an outcome tied to that workflow. And when I think about workflow, I want to start not with, well, what's the path that we do today, right? Go back and start with what's the outcome. And then what are the required steps? What do I absolutely have to do to get to that outcome? And how do I make that path through those steps as clean as possible and get people to that outcome as fast as possible? So we try, even in the way that we think about the technology and individual projects that we want, how do you put the outcome, what you're trying to achieve for your business, for your customer, for your employee front and center?
All right, so I want to get a little nerdy a second. My son he's learned coding, so I get to talk about all sorts of different coding platforms and stuff. And you guys are a low-code platform. And I was wondering to what extent, A, that participates in your ability to render complexity simple. And then two, how does what you just explained get briefed into the Pega programmers who are doing the coding of your system?
So I think the power of a low code platform, right? And this is even before there was low code, or the market had defined low code. This was sort of how Pega was thinking about the problem. And this goes back to some of the insights that were the founding of the company, which is, how can I distill in what I'm trying to get my software to do back to what is the business outcome that I'm trying to achieve? And how can I provide tools, whether they're forms, visual tools, graphical tools, that allow the person and the people who best understand the business to put their requirements into the platform? And if I can eliminate as much as possible the step of translating, this is what I want the software to do for me because of this business value, into, well, this is the if then else and for loops that need to run in a series of code to make that happen. As much as I can eliminate that translation and have the actual platform do that translation for me, then I have a better hope of getting what the business actually wants. I get out of the complexity of the technical implementation, and I focus instead on, again, what am I trying to actually get this software to do? And also, ideally, I get my business and my IT people looking and talking in the same language about what they're trying to make the software do, not sort of talking in incommensurable terms, right? About what languages that don't fit, but no, we're starting to talk in the same language. And I think that becomes hugely helpful.
So let's zero down on the business developers, your salespeople, and your programmers.
Yeah.
Two very different sets of people. And which is harder, to get the programmers to think about business, or the business developer salespeople to get to understand coding? Because there has to be also a level of empathy or sympathy for the coder's world, as in, things bug and shit happens.
Well, and I think the other thing that there has to be like sympathy for is the fact that IT is not getting easier; it's getting harder.
Oh, no kidding!
Right? The pressures around security and data privacy and protection, the complexities that we talked about around cloud architectures, right? Microservices architectures are wonderful and great, but microservices are a lot more complicated than monoliths, right? Like they just are. So there's inherent increasing complexity in the IT space. And I think that the word you used is empathy, and I think that is really, really important. But I do believe that the emerging need in an organization is for people who can sit on both sides of that line. That as a technologist, a vital skill for me, and we did some other research sort of on the state of IT. And one of the things that we heard from IT leaders was the growing importance of soft skills in their IT department. I need communicators. I need listeners. I need coaches and mentors. I need the soft skill part of my organization as much as I need JavaScript programmers and people who know Python. Right. So I think that's increasingly important. If you want to be an IT leader, you've got to be able to translate the technology into business, because just purely the act of coding, they're either low code platforms or cheaper places in the world sometimes where that can get done, right? But the translation and the understanding of how that technology can solve a business problem, that's a skill that's hard to automate out. That's a skill that's harder to take away. And I think the flip side is true on the business side, right? I think the truism, from Mark Andreessen, I think it was originally, that like every company is a software company. Well, that then implies that every business person is has to be thinking about how they use software to run their business. And I think the really great business leaders will look more and more like product managers. Will look more and more like people who have a deep understanding of a business domain and a business problem, but also have some pretty strong thoughts and opinions and understanding of how to use software and technology to address that business domain. So I don't know if one is harder or easier, but I think both are absolutely essential.
Well, I think that's a great conclusion. I don't know if you know, but I wrote a book about AI and empathy. So that topic is of particular interest to me. And I know that you make empathy an enormous part of the Pega system in the decision making. But I wanted to start with the fact that you guys just published an ebook on the state of AI in business today. And I'd love it for you to give me maybe what the most interesting insight or some factoid within it to give us an intrigue and interest to go get that book.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things, right? You know, some of the things that we discovered is, you know, potentially non-controversial, right? Organizations are continuing to make massive investments in AI. You know, they're making those investments because they have seen benefit, they have seen success.
Well,
right?
hence the idea of trying to find a solution to use it or find a problem to fix with it.
Yeah, and I think organizations, the thing that I've always kind of said about AI is part of and as a software vendor, I'm perhaps potentially responsible for some of this, right? But AI is actually not one big thing. AI is a bunch of very distinct technologies that each solve very distinct and specific business problems, right? You know, if you like the technology and the use of, say, voice recognition and how you think about that and how you apply it and where you can use it in your business to drive efficiencies is very different than decision optimization and real-time decisioning and how you might use that to change conversations, right? They're both AI, they're both incredibly powerful technologies, but you can't think of them as the same thing. You actually have to think of them as distinct, like unique tools in the toolbox. And so I think there's also this understanding that I'm going to need people who bring in a combination of, you know, both business savvy understanding, but also some of the analytic skills, right, that sit behind the cover there. And I think there's also this understanding that's grown that this isn't just now futuristic stuff for Google and Tesla to play with. This is stuff that I can apply inside a business at massive scale to deliver incredible value if I'm thoughtful and focused about it.
And being thoughtful and focused, that I would almost say, well, is being strategic. And so many companies pretend or think they have strategy, but I see endless times examples of companies with strategies that have 10 bullet points to them.
Yes. And getting to a focus on your strategy, and you know, the organizations that we've seen be most successful with this, the AI is just becomes a reflection of the brand value and strategy of the organization, right? You know, the organizations that I've seen be incredibly empathetic with the way they use AI is because as a brand, that's how they think. And AI is just, it's a tool that allows them to do it at scale. It's a tool that allows them to operationalize that. But AI doesn't replace the fact that that's got to be in your brand values, right? That's got to be a way of thinking. And you've got to have the understanding and the commitment of your customers to make that happen. And then AI can become an incredibly powerful tool to scale it out into every time you have a customer conversation, right? But AI on its own isn't going to do that.
Yeah, well, specific to this notion of AI and empathy, on the one hand, if you're not empathic, then what sort of brief are you providing for the programmers?
Right.
Two, if you encode empathy into your AI, but the rest of your organization, the people dealing with people, aren't empathic, then you're going to have a misfit. Everyone's only going to want to speak to your empathic chatbot.
Right.
And three, in the end of the day, if you don't have an empathic organization and you delegated that to your AI, why are you going to keep your employees? Why are they going to stay with you? Because you're a bunch of, less empathic individuals.
Well, and I don't think that you can't have, I don't believe, a truly empathic, AI technology. Say you're using AI for decisioning, right? AI and the decisioning technologies, they're optimization technologies, right? They're really good at looking at data and optimizing it, right? But AI isn't going to decide what you optimize for, right? You as a business have to be able to tell the AI, well, I want you to optimize for customer experience, or,
what does that look like?
What does that look like? Or I want you to optimize to sell as much stuff as you can, right? And what does that look like? And the right companies, the companies that bring empathy to us, are figure out how to draw that balance, right? Where it's not just, can I sell as much stuff as I can, but can I balance that with the relevance and the need and the immediacy for the customer? And understanding that if I'm having an interaction with my customer and I know that they've got a point of need, I know that, for example, the COVID pandemic has just hit. And from what I understand of them and their income, the best thing for them might be to actually recommend a little bit of loan forgiveness or temporary stop of payment on their loan, even though that's not selling them new stuff, right? That's an empathetic decision to make for the customer that ultimately is probably going to make the customer love your brand, right? And it's going to build that deep relationship. And probably it's in long term, it's the right decision for the business, right? I'm not saying you do this because you don't believe it's the right decision for the business, but that empathy is there because your people have built it into how they put those decisions together and how they use AI to get them, not because the AI magically discovered it for you. Like, AI is a tool. I don't believe it has empathy or not. I think we as human beings in our use of the tool optimize it and configure it and set it up to operate in ways that we believe are empathetic and that align with how we want to interact with humans and with customers and with employees.
And ultimately, when you are briefing it that way, I think an understated value to doing that is the engagement you get from your own employees. You talked at the very beginning about employee experience using the material. If you have a purpose that's just on a wall that doesn't get lived, you're just rolling eyes. If you have a purpose and you actually say, hey, listen, you guys, we need to, reduce the loan requirements or whatever, because we have a humane understanding of what's happening here, then that just makes you get the good feeling part. And we're not being philanthropic, because we ultimately know that this is about building long-term loyalty, but short-term loss, long-term gain.
That's right. And also, I think the other thing that's important, especially as we think about employee experience, is being conscious and aware of where and how you use technology like AI to actually get out of the way of the employee doing the thing that the employee wants to do, right? Like, the best software and the best systems to me are effective because they give the employees, the users of the software, the information, the tools at their fingertips, in some cases the guidance, that means they don't have to deal with the complexity of, like, well, what system does this data live in again? Or what are the rules for managing this kind of request, right? The system would do that for them. So they can focus on being the human stuff, on listening to the customer, on using that conversation to build a relationship, on bringing their own problem-solving skills and experience to bear on the problem. And I think that's, to me, that also is about being empathetic, about understanding the employee experience and really thinking about how we use technology to get out of the way of the employee and make them not just not just more effective, but let them do what they can do so well. Let them bring that forward.
So last piece before we close off, in your report, your research on hybrid work, because you obviously with what's been going on, there's been the challenge of the pandemic, the war, the economic situation. But there's also now an imposition, or at least a highly recommended imposition, if you will, of more hybrid work as we come out of the pandemic. Can you tell us what might be what the research said about that? And maybe in your words, Don, as you yourselves grapple with it within Pega, what are the types of best recipes to help make hybrid work? I feel it's going to be very hard.
I think it is too. So over half the employees that we surveyed felt that the pandemic was going to make businesses more complex in the long run. And 1 in 3, felt that hybrid work was going to make their jobs more complex, right? And for a lot of them, that has to do with the fact that, hybrid work, and I think we've all experienced this, right? The work-life balance gets complicated.
Oh God, yeah. Where's the line?
You don't have that clean line of leave, start my commute. That opens the work day. I shut down my computer. I start my commute home. That closes the work day, and I have family time or personal time or whatever time on the other side of that. So I think that complexity is certainly there. I think it's also really important that we become much more thoughtful in how we work. So we've gotten really pretty structured about things like no meeting Fridays, right? And that, frankly, can't just be a suggestion. It actually has to be something that's lived from the leadership down. Because I think it is, especially in a hybrid world, if you're not careful, because you want to try to maintain connection and check in with people, you can find yourself, in back-to-back Zoom calls all day, and then figuring out, when do I actually do the work that came out of all those Zoom calls, right? So doing things like that, establishing work time for people. And I think also, encouraging and demonstrating with managers the importance of, if we are going to ask people for hybrid work, we have to be willing to also be flexible in the business. And that means that, I have to move a meeting because somebody needs to take their kid to soccer practice, or, I have some employees who need, from 2 to 5, they need that time, but I know that they're going to pop back on at like 7:30 and catch up on emails from the day, right? And building that level of trust, but also flexibility, empathy for everybody's unique situation. And then I think the final thing is, as we come back to the office, we need to be thoughtful about how we do it. There's nothing worse than going into the office and then just sitting on Zoom calls all day. Right? So I think we also need to use the return to office we need to be very, very specific about, we're going to come into the office and we're going to bring these people together today to accomplish this. Right. And then we can go back to remote and we can do that. But it needs to be thoughtful. And I think we're always going to have, a mix of people. There are lots of folks in our organization who like being in the office, especially, frankly, if you're in your 20s and you're living in an apartment that you share with a couple roommates and a lot of your parents, or your parents, and a lot of your social connection is from work. You'd rather be in the office, and that's great. Yeah.
But there's so many companies that I see that say, we'll have office work Tuesdays and Thursdays, but then they don't architect the work on Tuesdays and Thursdays to make it worthwhile
to be office work, right?
That's right.
And I think that's where we need to figure out what that thoughtfulness is, so that we are actually. I think that there are benefits in hybrid work and remote work. I think there's absolutely benefits in bringing people together in person to do things, but I think we actually need to exploit the benefits of each and not operate at cross purposes to each other.
One of the good things of the pandemic, I think, is somehow it did blur the line between work and personal life. Because before, I think there was a tendency to say, well, what's at home stays at home, or what's at work goes at. But then we completely obviated everything around our personal lives. The fact that you play guitar and I have kids, and oh my God, he's a human being. He's not just a robot. I say he because that would be typically the thing. And yet we also need to know to respect people's emotions and the challenges they have. So I really enjoyed your ideas there for making hybrid work. I think that people, if only a third in your study said it's going to make it more complex, I think they really actually haven't thought it through enough. It should be much higher number of people thinking it's going to be a shitstorm.
Yes.
Don, we have Pega World coming up.
Yes.
What would you say will be the biggest reason for coming on to check it out, and what type of clients are you looking for at Pega? What do you think are the people who need you most?
Well, so I think maybe the two questions have the same answer, right? So I think the number one reason to get there is to actually hear from other clients, right? From what they've done and how they've used technology to be successful, right? So you're going to get a chance to hear, among others, at Pega World, from folks like Lloyd's Bank and T-Mobile and Booking.com and Ford Motor Company, right? And so I think the kinds of clients and the people that I think will really benefit from that are organizations that are struggling with those kinds of economies of scale, operating large, in some cases multinational organizations that operate across multiple product lines, right? Where the complexity just gets multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And how do you begin to cut through some of that and really focus on the employee, focus on the customer experience? So I think you're going to hear a lot of examples of how organizations have done that and get very tactical. Low code is great. How do you roll out what we've called a low code factory at enterprise scale, so that if you're an organization, and Ford is going to speak about this, if you're an organization that wants to use this low code technology, how do you do it in such a way that your IT department isn't running $1 million projects 5 years from now to clean up all these low code apps that are messy and security holes, etc. So how do you again build for change? How do you set up the architecture in the organization that's going to allow freedom and allow flexibility, but also ensure that we need to do the things right around security and maintainability and scalability, so that these platforms can last years, decades into the future?
I remember in my time working at L'Oreal where we had upgrades or times when we were changing systems. And I know that could look like an ominous or big topic, like you're saying, that can really eat up a whole bunch of your programmers' time.
Yes.
In a short sell, how easy is it to integrate Pega into my system?
Yeah, and one of the things that we've built Pega is it was built from the ground up for interoperability, because so much of what we help organizations do, it's not about replacing individual big systems like your SAP or your CRM. I think a lot of the complexity is the fact that your employees and customers have to navigate the gaps between those systems themselves.
Yeah.
So if we can act as the glue that connect those back up, whether from a workflow perspective or from a common decisioning perspective, in order to use that data to inform customer decisions, that's where we can drive the value. So we've built the architecture and we've built the technology such that it can work with Salesforce. We have clients where Salesforce is their front end, Pega is their workflow engine, and it actually updates a back end in SAP, but the experience is seamless for the employee. And I think that's the important part.
Well, that sounds good. I like it. So May 24th, 9:00 Eastern Standard or Eastern Daytime will be Pega World. That's coming right up. What's the best way to follow what you're up to? Do you write? Do you tweet? Give us your handles.
Yeah, I tweet. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Don Schuerman, or you can find me at Don Pega on Twitter. So I hope.
Well, is that Don Pega? It's Mr. Pega. Don
Pega. Yeah,
Pega.
Don Pega. Yes. Yeah.
Está bien. Lovely having you on the show, Don. Thanks very much. Looking forward to Pega World in a couple of days.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, put to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man, in the arms of a woman.
You've got questions, we've got answers. Business leadership, ownership, and sales can be challenging. Tune into the Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast to learn from the world's experts. Join me, your host, Diane Helbig, as I chat with people who have expertise in various areas of business. You'll enjoy the lively conversations that are focused on providing you with the ideas, tips, and suggestions you need to realize greater success. Get what you need for your business when you need it from the people who have the answers. Accelerate Your Business Growth is part of the Evergreen Podcast Network and is available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.